Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, but my main focus is astrology. Astrology has been my main focus on this show for the last, going into my 12th, 13th year. I've almost lost track. But anyway, the wheel is still turning, which is the good news. And one of the ways it does turn is through your support. You can donate through my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. I'm sort of like an NPR person, so I have to keep asking for support, but that's how we do it these days. And so any way you can help out to keep this wheel turning is appreciative. I get people who contribute once in a while, and it really does help to defray the costs and the time I put into this. It's a lot of work putting a podcast together like this. You've got to negotiate with your guests. You've got to make sure the scheduling is right. You've got to have a good topic. You've got to be on your toes when you are talking. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about it. It's not just fluffy air stuff that's out there. It's valuable information you're going to be receiving today, especially with my guest. I also want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology, as that is how it applies to all of us on the planet, sort of the major aspects and transits that are happening over the course of the week, and then I break it out into the individual signs. I always encourage you to read your sun sign, and I always encourage you to read your rising sign as well, because I think between the two of those, you'll get a very valid idea of what's coming unfolding in your week to come, and I've got incredible open rates on that, so I know that it's working, and I know that we're doing good work here, so keep that in mind as well. So without any further ado, about 10, 12 years ago, I interviewed my guest, and I had a great time talking with her back then, and we're going to be talking today about the Ascendant, which I just mentioned. The Ascendant is the same thing as the rising sign in the chart, and it's a valuable point, one of my favorite signature points in the astrology chart. So it's going to be great to be able to discuss that. And my guest is Jodie Forrest, and her website is Jodie Forrest Astrology. It's Forrest with two R's. And Jodie as Jodie, JodieForrestAstrology.com. And we're going to be talking today about interpreting the Ascendant in readings, because Jodie is currently holding a online class webinar on the Ascendant and how to interpret it. And you can jump in at any point in time because the whole thing's going to be recorded, so that's something to consider. Anyway, Jodie, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. It's great to have you back on again. I know it's been a long time, but the Ascendant is still the Ascendant, and it's still there, so welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, so, I've always been, as I said in my intro, the Ascendant has always been one of my favorite signatures in the chart because I think it's much more visceral and with regard to trying to understand a person. We know all the basic characteristics of all the signs, but then when you combine that with a different Ascendant, it really livens up the whole portrait of the individual. And I'm wondering what your take on it is and how you came to like it so much.
Oh, gosh. I think I started studying it intently because it was actually one of the hardest things in astrology for me to feel like I understood.
Really? Interesting.
The definition of the Ascendant is a little fluid, like the definition of birth is a little fluid.
Right.
The Ascendant is created when you take your first breath at the moment you're born. Mm-hmm. But there is some controversy about, does birth happen when the baby is outside the mother? Does it happen when the water breaks? Does it happen when the baby's cord is cut?
Right.
Does it happen when the baby breathes on its own? And the Ascendant is a little similar. Mm-hmm. It introduces you to reality. It has a lot to do with the body, since it's when your body first emerged. And as your body contains you, and you experience the world through your physical body, the Ascendant contains the rest of the chart. And the Ascendant, metaphorically, energetically, is how you experience the outside world and how the outside world experiences you.
It's sort of our first introduction
uniform.
it's our introduction to the world at that moment in time. And so, you have to figure about it. Our impressions coming into the world. You take a baby born, whatever, in August, and if their ascendant is Capricorn, their view of the world is going to be far different than the person born at a different time with a different thing. So the whole view of entering the world at a specific place and time, it really does color our first impressions. And I think that's a valuable piece. And of course, the other problem is that oftentimes you mentioned it's a critical piece, but also it depends upon, as you mentioned, is it when the water breaks? Is it when the cord gets cut? When the baby takes their first breath? All those are valid, but also it depends upon if somebody's in the room taking down the time, which is a very critical piece. I hear that awful lot of time with my clients. Mm-hmm. The nurse, it wasn't recorded, they don't know, then they have to go back and ask their mother, and the mother was under anesthesia, and she doesn't remember because she just gave birth. There's all that controversy as well. So, just curious about that as well.
Mm-hmm. That's true. A lot happens around a birth, and sometimes people think, oh, it happened 10 minutes ago, when it might have happened 20 or 30.
Mm-hmm. And in that span of time,
is very subjective when you're busy.
Yeah, and in that time frame, a lot can vary as far as the accuracy of the person.
Oh, yes. Sometimes even 5 minutes can make a difference.
Yeah, it does. I know that for a fact. I've got twins that were born 6 minutes apart. And they've got,
oh, you do?
Yeah, and that's why the Ascendant has always been fascinating to me, because they are, one is 21 Sag rising, the other one's 23 rising Sag. So, because the Earth turns 1 degree every 4 minutes, and in that span of 2 minutes, we got in 2 different degrees there.
Yeah, and you definitely have 2 different people, regardless of how similar they are.
That's very true, yeah. That's what I've studied. So it's fascinating. I mean, and you're teaching a class currently. Let's talk about that real quickly. Your class you're teaching is called Interpreting the Ascendant in Readings, and it's on Tuesdays from 7:30 to 9. And it began last, I guess, on the 15th. But people can jump in at any point in time and get the recordings that come with that, correct?
Yes, that's 7:30 Eastern.
Yes.
And it's with the International Academy of Astrology.
Okay, good. We'll get that, and I'll make sure we repeat that later so people can get that. But getting back to the Ascendant, what drew you to it? Was it the complexity? Was it the illumination that it provides with regard to reading the individual? What is it that drew you to it?
I needed to figure out how to be more comfortable with my own Ascendant, I think. Mm-hmm. It's a bit out of kilter with the rest of my chart, and just exploring and getting to know and understand my own made me realize how crucial it is to be comfortable with your Ascendant. Or it's just, if you're not comfortable with your Ascendant, you feel a little bit raw in the world.
Out of
the
sorts.
Ascendant's like the skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like your skin.
The mask we wear. I always use the example of, like, say, if you went to a play and you saw somebody on stage in an outfit or a costume, you would assume that person was representative of the costume. I think it's the same sort of metaphor when we're talking about the Ascendant.
There are a lot of parallels between acting the Ascendant and the Ascendant. Yes, you could say your Ascendant is your costume. It's the energy uniform that you need to wear. Probably my favorite symbol lately would be the spaceship. It's the vehicle that introduces us to this planet and through which we travel around the planet. And it's equipped to explore the territory that we need to explore in this lifetime, even though that territory might feel a little bit unusual or puzzling to the rest of the chart.
It's one of a three...
so to speak.
Yeah. It's one leg of a three-legged stool, I think, especially when you're trying to do a quick synopsis of an individual, the sun, the moon, and the Ascendant.
Oh, yes. Definitely. It's one of the big 3. And the house that contains the Ascendant's ruler, I think, is just as important as the house containing the sun and the house containing the moon. We spend about as much time in the chart ruler's house, the Ascendant ruler's house, as we do in the solar house or the lunar house.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it is very true. In my case, I have a Virgo rising, and so obviously I'm ruled by Mercury, and I can feel that that mercurial component is part of what I do. I mean, here I am on the radio. I'm a writer. I mean, that's exactly what a Gemini. It's Gemini energy right there for sure. And sort of the mercurial kind of quality.
Yeah, and it's your craft. It's a mercurial craft to be on the radio and to write.
Mm-hmm.
And Virgo needs a craft that they feel comfortable using.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I was growing up, I didn't know that until I didn't know my ascendant probably until I was about 20, and when I had my first real astrology reading done, and and when the person discovered this about me, and it was a perfect stranger, which was what made it all that more and spicy, because this person did not know me, and all of a sudden, and it was a perfect stranger. It was totally sort of one of these impromptu sort of things. I just happened to meet her. She had started working where I was that day, and she said, "Do you have your birth information?" I did. And so she came back in the next day with 6 handwritten pages of who I was, and it just blew me away. And from that moment onward, for the last 40 years, I've been immersed in astrology and understanding it and its in its various components, and never ceases to amaze me. I think I spend most of my time in my life trying to prove it wrong, but I just can't seem to do that. I just can't seem to do that. I'm sure you can relate to that.
I hear that story from time to time.
Yeah. Oh, it's true.
People get fascinated, they want to prove it wrong, and the more deeply they go into it, the more they discover about themselves. That's one of the big draws, is the heightening of your self-awareness.
Yeah. Well, it's uncanny that someone could know so much about me and never have met me. That's true for even the clients I speak with today. I mean, you always get that, wow, how do you know this? And it's just, it's what's fascinating about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what?
I agree.
Yeah, I think that I also think that as far as when it comes to a relationship, I think the ascendant plays a key role in the relationship of the ascendant to the sun or the moon, or even the ascendant of the other individual in a relationship. Like, it plays a very critical role.
Yes. Yes, absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
You need to be comfortable with your ascendant. When you're not comfortable in it, you feel naked, or you feel overdressed, or you feel skinned, or you feel confined. There's a way in which you either reveal too much of yourself or not enough, because the ascendant is the filter between you and the rest of the world. And you need to be comfortable with your ascendant, and the person you are in a deep relationship with also needs to be comfortable with your ascendant.
And why would a person not feel comfortable with their ascendant if it was something that they were born with? They just sort of feel you think more the sun or the moon would be a more predominant aspect of who they were, and they might default to that mode versus their ascendant?
Well, I really think it depends on the balance and the interaction between all three, sun, moon, and ascendant. If you think about it in very simple terms, let's say that the sun and the moon are in air, but the ascendant's in water. This is a thinking person who needs to learn to take a more feeling-oriented approach to life.
Right, I can see.
Just the elemental imbalance is important. Or imagine you have someone who's a double Aries but has Cancer rising.
Right, exactly.
So
their impulsivity. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone who needs adventures, somebody who eats adventures for breakfast, somebody who wants to win, someone who has a streak of heroism, someone who needs to prove himself to himself. And Cancer rising prefers to reveal itself only when it feels safe. And the double Aries needs to put itself in situations that don't feel totally safe, just as a way of growing.
Right, risk-taking, exactly. That is me. I'm an Aries with a Virgo rising, so I know the feeling all too well. Have you ever heard of a sort of a process of interpretation that was put forth by Mark Edmund Jones, who's the man behind the Sabian symbols? He had a approach called the high leg approach, in which you would take the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, and you'd find the two compatible of the three, and then whatever the third one that was odd would be the one that would be predominant with regard to the personality. And I'll give you an example. If you had a sun in fire, a moon in water, and an ascendant in earth, the water and the earth would obviously blend together, and therefore the fire would be the third leg out, but the fire would be the one that would be the predominant personality trait that the people would see. Or at least, and that was just based on his theory. And I'm just curious if you ever heard of that or would know about that.
Yes, I have heard of that. And I read that a considerably long time ago, but I do remember reading it and thinking about it.
It's sort of an interesting way of parsing that three-legged information, you know?
Yeah, the three-legged stool. I like your term, the three-legged stool.
Yeah. So
coming to terms with, understanding, becoming comfortable with the high leg is in some ways a lifelong process.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, when it comes to sort of the idea of, I think this is one of the, as we all know, it's probably the hardest piece of the puzzle to put together, simply because it's often unknown. It's always shrouded in this vagueness. But there is a 2-hour window in which you could be any sign, so we know that much. And of course, I think that depending upon where you land in that 30-degree spread of a sign, it has variations of shade, of color to them. And I use color as a metaphor for how we just talk about variations of a quality or an attribute. In other words, if somebody came in at 15 degrees Cancer, they would be really, really Cancer, as opposed to being 28 degrees or being 2 degrees. I think there's a sort of a bleed-over effect from the other signs. And do you think that would apply to the Ascendant as well, as far as sort of how much of that sign they represented through their actions and their sort of their costume that they were wearing?
Yes and no. I think that the first degree of the sign, 0 degree something Cancer, is extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if it's so new that the person needs to insist on it.
Yeah.
I think it strengthens the energy of the sign, but also makes it a little delicate and new, and I must work this, but I'm really not sure how.
Mm-hmm. That's probably true for all of the cardinal signs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The first degree of a sign, it's sort of like a foal is born and has to get up on its legs and run right away.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what having the first degree of a sign feels like. I must master this. It's in the interest of my survival to master this. I have to be able to get up and move.
That's the challenge. Whereas if you've moved further into the degree, you're more confident, you're more comfortable with that because it's more familiar. You've got a heavier dose of it, perhaps, right?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And the last degree is a degree that's in flux. There's change. It's as if the person is finishing up something in a cycle that refers to that sign. Some aspect of the sign's energy it's tying up some loose knots with. Or one might feel like a new moon, the other might feel like a balsamic moon.
Right. Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated by the Ascendant because I think it really is it's more of a mouthpiece, for lack of a better word, or a channel, or how the sign beneath it, all the other pieces of the chart beneath it or beside it, manifest. So, and there's a multitude of combinations that are there because we've got 12 signs, and of course you're going to have a variety of all those things. So the mathematical permutations get pretty elaborate, but you can tell quite a bit about a person by knowing those 3 data points. But the Ascendant in particular, I think, lends a sort of I want to think of the right metaphor here, but it's a way of sort of, you're wearing a costume, as we mentioned, but that costume has a distinct underpinnings of personality, which may be manifested by the sun or the moon in the chart. And the Ascendant sort of is the one that gives you that introduction. So your first impressions, they always say you never have a second chance to make a first impression. That impression is laced in directly with what the Ascendant is, because the Ascendant is often how we, in our day-to-day sort of cursory observations of people, we come to conclusions that this person must be such and such a person sometimes. And
yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think the Ascendant has that quality. Any planets in the first house flesh out the Ascendant and give it some nuances. Where the ruler of the Ascendant is adds another factor, and aspects to the Ascendant are sort of the icing on the cake. Any planet and aspect of the Ascendant, sooner or later the outside world senses it through the Ascendant. Right. Whether the person is comfortable with using it or comfortable with showing it probably depends more on the nature of the aspect.
Mm-hmm. And do you find certain aspects more predominant than others? I mean, obviously, the harder aspects are going to be more of a challenge for the person, and they're going to provide more of stepping stones for them to rise to their occasion, whereas softer ones might be a little bit easier to get by, or more self-evident,
Yes.
I guess, for example.
Yes. If we continue the clothing metaphor, a planet making an aspect to the ascendant is kind of like an important accessory
Yes, I like
for
that.
that person's
Yep.
costume.
Yep, I like that.
Something they're carrying, something they have, something they're holding, something they're wearing, something that follows them around. If you take an imaginative leap into fairy tale ideation, you might imagine someone with Venus in a flowing aspect to the ascendant is like a woman in a fairy tale who was sweet and blessed, and every time she opened her mouth, roses fell out, or pearls.
Yeah.
But if, say, Mars is making a harsh aspect to the ascendant, it might not be roses or pearls.
It might be a little more aggressive.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because those things become sort of character traits of the individual. We've seen people who were very flamboyant dressers, and they became known for their flamboyance, and that became sort of their identity. They're sort of their signatures. And you look at someone, say, like David Bowie, who was very flamboyant, but he was always a matter of, he was always changing his costume and his presentation to the world. I don't know what his ascendant is. I can easily find that out, I think. I know he was a Capricorn.
I've seen two versions of his chart. One had Neptune and Libra on the ascendant, and I don't recall the other one.
That Neptune and Libra does make sense because there is that fantasy illusion appeal. Sort of that elusive quality that would work well with him.
Yeah.
And then when you think of planets that are in, say, opposition in a natal planet, in opposition to the ascendant, I would think that would, it's a supportive role in some ways, isn't it? It sort of provides a counterpoint to the way the nature of the ascendant is being portrayed.
Yes, it does. And oppositions to the ascendant are particularly important in relationships, I think. There's a need for us to understand the opposing planet and claim it and use it well in order to be in the kind of relationship that we most need. In other words, if you have Mars opposing your ascendant, you need to develop a certain amount of inner strength rather than just relating to people who are carrying an exaggerated form of strength. You get strong yourself, or you may draw people to you who have an excess of Mars or aren't using their Mars well, and maybe cause you stress or are aggressive until finally you put your foot down and claim your own Mars and say, wait a minute, let's talk about this.
Probably the same is true for Mars.
Counterpoint is quite true.
Yeah, it's probably true for Mars on the ascendant as well, isn't it? I mean, Mars on the ascendant can present a very sort of willful, impulsive, perhaps willful. Yeah, I think impulsive is proper. Willful person with a strong drive to exert their personality.
Yes, I would say so. There's a need to relate to reality directly and confidently and be effective in it. Their bark generally needs to be worse than their bite.
Right.
But they need to be radiating energy that says, essentially, don't mess with me.
Or a force to be reckoned.
I'm strong, I'm confident.
Yeah,
I am a force to be reckoned with. Richard Idemont once said, when someone asked him what Mars most wants, he said penetration.
Yeah.
And I think that was a perfect word.
It is true.
There's a desire to have an effect on the outside world, to penetrate it, to the word that came to mind was impose yourself on
impose,
it.
I was just going to say that.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Mars is an interesting character, especially if it isn't in relationship to the ascendant, because it becomes it's an easy one to identify. We can see sort of this aggression there. We can see, and interestingly enough, back to Mark Edmund Jones, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, he wrote up, and back in the 1930s, he wrote up a sort of a step-by-step list of points to check off when you are interpreting a chart. This is one of his books about learning astrology. And he gave this talk in front of a bunch of people in New York City. And the first point he looked at in the astrological chart was not the sun, the moon, or the ascendant. It was Mars. I thought that was very interesting.
That's fascinating.
He recommended looking at Mars first.
It makes sense in a way, because Mars is the natural ruler of the ascendant.
And it's the motivator. It's
And
how you express. Yeah.
yeah, one of the things I think about the Ascendant is that we get some lessons in how to use our Ascendant well and effectively every time we have a Mars return.
Oh, interesting.
Certainly the Mars returns refer to the healthy expression of Mars in our charts. But being able to express Mars in a healthy manner, I think, always makes it easier for us to do our Ascendant, because the Ascendant is how we interact with the world.
Right. And channeling that Mars and Ascendant energy together is a way to do it, if you can do it without force, but rather just maybe through coercion, because coercion is a way of getting your way, but you're not doing it by slamming it down somebody's throat. You're trying to be diplomatic about it. So there is just knowing that piece right there might be a much handier negotiation tool for anybody who's in the process of having to negotiate anything, whether that be the sale of a house or a divorce or whatever. You have to be able to negotiate. And it shows a motive, which would be Mars, and a being aware of your Mars, like you said, being self-aware, which astrology is perfect for, helping you become self-aware. It allows us to see the way that you could channel that in a positive way, as opposed to coming across too aggressive or too, volatile.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Mars rules boundaries. The Ascendant is a kind of boundary.
Yeah.
Mars rules the desire nature, and the Ascendant is sort of like our engine on the planet, than our spaceship. And where does that engine go? What does it need to explore? Are Ascendant questions that are relatively related to Mars, because Mars wants something. Mars is the desire nature, and Mars acts to get it. The Ascendant needs to act, so does Mars. They certainly have that in common.
In your spaceship analogy, do you think of the Ascendant as the capsule with which that's the spaceship, and then inside the capsule are the sun and the moon?
Yes, actually.
Using that sort of, example.
That would be how I would envision it.
Mm-hmm.
What the spaceship looks like, how it's equipped, how much space is given, say, to weapons versus the pantry versus the place where people are entertaining themselves. In some ways it relates to the whole chart, but we can get a pretty good idea just by looking at the Ascendant, planets that conjunct it, planets that are in it, where the ruler is, and what aspects it. All of those describe the spaceship. Mm. The most important factor is always the sign itself that's on the Ascendant. That's the territory somebody's been set down in, and that's what they need to use their vehicle to explore.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that analogy of the spaceship. You can really visualize it, because you're traveling through this life in a vehicle, and in that vehicle you have, the vehicle is sort of the car, or the spaceship, as you say. And inside that vehicle is the real true character of the individual that comes out and decides where that vehicle goes and how that vehicle gets there. Right? They're the ones that are sort of driving it, but it still is the vehicle, and you see it coming, and you know that this is the vehicle that does such and such.
Yes.
Interesting.
It's crewed by all the planets.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm talking today with Jodie Forrest, and we're talking about the Ascendant, and the Ascendant in a astrology chart, and the importance of it, and how valid it is. Her website is Jodie Forrest Astrology, so it's JodieForrest, astrology.com, and she's currently in the process of a webinar which is discussing the Ascendant itself, and it's still ongoing, and you can still jump in to join. If you go to our website, JodieForrestAstrology.com, you will find information on how to join that, and I encourage you to look into that. I think it's one of the critical points in the chart to understand and really get your hands or head around, because until you really know it and know yourself, you don't really arrive at that point of self-awareness. We'll take a quick break. Maybe you can go swing over to Jodie's site while we're on the break. And again, it's JodieForrest.astrology.com. JodieForrest, JodieForrestAstrology.com. And we'll be back to pick up our discussion about the Ascendant with her after the break. So hang in there, and we'll be right back. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. Hope you had a chance to check out Jodie's site. Jodie Forrest astrology.com is her website, and you can check out her webinar there. So we're back on the show, and we're going to be talking a bit. One of the interesting characteristics of the Ascendant is, obviously it's a data point in the astrology chart, and the data point in the astrology chart is going to be triggered by various transits throughout the course of a life or day or period of time. And those aspects to the Ascendant are powerful indicators of what, Jodie? I'm curious to see what you say they are indicators of. Is it an indicator of a mood for the day? Because they're going to be relatively quick unless it's a long-term planet. If obviously you got Saturn on the Ascendant or Pluto on the Ascendant, you're going to be going through a much different thing than Mercury or the Moon on the Ascendant. So I'm curious how you sort of weigh that out.
Well, I think any planet transiting over the Ascendant, conjoining it, is a messenger saying, look at your uniform, look at your spaceship. Something needs overhauling or changing or amplifying. If it's a faster moving inner planet, it's more as if you need to take on the energy of that planet for the day or the week to do something, actively do something that indicates your response to this planet. When something is transiting the Ascendant or aspect of the Ascendant, it typically calls for a response, a kinetic response in the outside world. The outer planet transits are more dramatic and last longer. And I always imagine them as, say, Uranus or Neptune or Pluto, coming into your house, going to your closet, tossing out half the clothes and saying, those don't fit you. Let's find something that fits you better.
Mm-hmm.
And you embark on a long conversation about why they don't fit you and what needs to happen next. Or if you prefer the spaceship metaphor, it temporarily needs an overhaul. But you can't really go into space dock while this is happening. You're still out there flying.
Yeah. Right, that's great.
So the persona needs to adapt. The persona needs to change. The persona needs to adjust. The persona needs a tune-up.
Mm-hmm. So many of us growing up in the 60s had to have the Pluto-Uranus conjunction at some point in time mess with our lives or embellish our lives or light up our lives. And I think I recall going back to that time, I had Pluto and Uranus on my Ascendant in around 1966, 1967, and my life totally turned upside down because my parents, for whatever reason, decided to send me away to a boarding school. And, that was a big change for me, and I was not at all prepared for it. I mean, I prepared for it as best I could, but I mean, it was a major life change, so that certainly supports what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be huge. Uranus and Pluto in particular coming over in Ascendant can be correlated with vast changes.
With fast changes,
I imagine you needed vast changes.
Yeah.
You needed to reform your persona as an adaptation to being in boarding school.
Oh, of course, yeah. You have to. You're in a room full. You're in a world at a very young age, 14, I think I was, trying to, figure out what's going on. You're still trying to wrestle with your own sense of self and puberty and everything else happening at that time, and then you're tossed into this area of kids and the same thing, and you're living away from home, so you haven't got that sort of comfort that you might have expected. There's no place to hide, for example, and it does put you it does put you in a space where you have to sort of, like you say, reinvent yourself in some ways. Or
the question is, what behavior will help me survive this situation? Mm-hmm. What behavior will help me flourish in this situation?
And my inclination would be to sort of lean into it, but you don't always know that when you're 14 years old. You don't know what the word lean in means.
Of course not.
So you have no idea what that means, and you just sort of, you're a deer in the headlights.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are, and that's a delicate age. It is so important. So many influences that we're working out and understanding really the rest of our lives, I think, come into being around then, just in terms of our lives in society and the beginning of adolescence. Yeah. Very important years, very formative.
Yeah, they are. So the aspects of, and of course, obviously the outer planets are going to have longer term impact on the ascendant. And it's when you see people with, serious planets on the ascendant, like Saturn or Pluto or Uranus or Neptune, any of the major outer planets, you can see great changes in them as they sort of have to step into the challenges that are presented to them. Because you said that conjoining, it's when they're actually paired up and they're together and they're actually sitting on the ascendant, that you really have to rise to the occasion to sort of adapt to them and sort of morph to fitting that. So I guess our personalities do change over time to some extent. Obviously we have our basic inherent attributes that we get from our birth, but we do sort of massage those characteristics as we go through life, and I think those moments when those bigger planets are on the ascendant, those are the moments when we really do have to do that.
Yes. Something about the presentation of the self needs to shift when those outer planets are busy.
Yeah.
I think Neptune is a little bit less dramatic, perhaps, in the outer world, but it's quite important in the inner world. Mm-hmm. Neptune on the ascendant.
Yeah.
People who are born with Neptune on the ascendant, I find actors and actresses who are good at just taking on the entire character, turning into that character for the duration of the show, frequently have a strong Neptune. Their own persona is fluid enough that it's easier to let go of it and put on the character's persona temporarily. Mm-hmm.
You can almost hide behind that persona.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
But in most people's lives, they are not playing a character when Neptune transits their ascendant. And something about how they may have been underdoing or overdoing the ascendant needs a sort of Neptunian review. Mm-hmm. It's also a tremendously sensitizing influence.
Very sensitizing and very open to deep pondering, which may lead a person the wrong way or the right way. I mean, there's a sense of that sort of quest for knowledge and quest for understanding who they are. I had a client who had a Jupiter, Neptune in Scorpio on the ascendant. Very, very interesting person, and who had sort of like qualities of, obviously, literally qualities of illusion and delusion, and that's exactly what it was. There was not looking through a clear lens, so to speak. It was almost like you're looking through a pair of sunglasses and there's Vaseline on the lens, so you get this sort of foggy imagery of what might be real. And then with Jupiter, all that got amplified. So the idea of delusion and illusion was even more so than just Neptune alone on the ascendant, I thought, in that case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The phrase wishful thinking just came into my mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or magical thinking.
Magical thinking, yeah. I mean, there's, I think any of these aspects, they all, and we all know that astrology is a dualistic sort of modality, and in there, those characteristics can go either way. And I think the idea that could be a masterful thing to have that Neptune on the ascendant could give them a great. I can almost see someone like a visionary film producer or an artist having that sort of, because there's this great sort of mystical, cerebral kind of vision that comes from that. And yet, it also could be a delusional kind of quality too. So,
well, Neptune is the planet that wants us to tune in to our mystical, otherworldly, transcendent self, the part of us that is mysteriously connected to the entire rest of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as if Neptune wants to dissolve in some ways and merge into something larger and higher than the self. But the ascendant it's like the skin. It's a membrane between you and the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You can't let it dissolve completely. I think that person needs a place in his or her life where the ascendant can dissolve in a safe place on a safe basis. It might be creativity, it might be meditation, it might be compassionate work with other people, but the ascendant cannot dissolve all the time.
Right.
That's not its job.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point you make there, because I think in many ways, any aspect in the chart is a manifestation of trying to find use it to your best interest. We have these things, and they have this dualistic quality, and they can go either way. It's not all black and white, but I think the ability to be able to sort of see that role and use it to your higher good. That's where you really learn. That's where the value of astrology has been for me. It's like finding your attributes and your liabilities, and then playing to the crowd in that regard, so that you come out at the best angle of those two things.
Yes, it definitely helps you use your strengths.
Mm-hmm. So when you see people with so you think the co-joining of the ascendant, meaning right on the ascendant, is the most potent version of that. A square to an ascendant would provide a challenge. Let's just bring it out as an example. Suppose you got Saturn in your 10th coming across your midheaven. Squaring your ascendant. Squaring your ascendant is going to mean that you have to sort of rise to the occasion in some way. There's going to be a challenge there, and with Saturn, that would happen every 7 years as it goes around the wheel.
Yes.
As an example.
Well, there needs to be a realistic assessment of your vocation, your public identity, what people who have heard of you have heard.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's met you, they meet your ascendant. If they've just heard of you, they hear of your midheaven.
Right. Exactly.
And Saturn crossing the midheaven is a time when you want what people hear about you to be as in line as possible with who you are,
mm-hmm.
and the gift that you can give to the larger community. The 4th house is like the roots of the chart. The 10th is where it flowers into the community around you and offers something to others, where you symbolize something to others. And when Saturn up there is squaring the ascendant, it does require some adjustments of your persona. You may have to put on costumes or roles you're not entirely thrilled with. Your persona may need to get more flexible. If you're an introvert, you may need to learn to behave in extroverted manners,
right,
in order for you to keep on flowering into the community, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If something about your ascendant is preventing that flowering at the midheaven, that needs to shift.
Yeah. And the same is true for an easy aspect to the ascendant.
Yeah. It will be easier to do, but it still requires a shift.
So it's sort of a new piece of clothing you put on at that time. You sort of present yourself differently. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Saturn trining the ascendant is more like a realistic personal shopper who knows the ropes of your particular job, takes you out and gifts you with this new wardrobe.
Mm-hmm.
A square is more, you realize, wait a minute, I don't have anything appropriate to wear, and I need something appropriate to wear, but I'm so busy at work, when am I going to find the time to do this? It takes effort. It takes practice. It takes observing the people around you.
Mm-hmm. The challenge is always there.
Yourself, what?
Yeah,
the challenge is always there.
Mm-hmm.
One is easier than the other.
It's interesting. It's fascinating, especially with some of the, I think the planets that are the most probably, I mean, they're all important, but the planets that I think would be the most growth-oriented, I think, come from Saturn and sort of the progress that you make. 'Cause I think Saturn does put challenges before you, but the gift of the Saturn transit, regardless if it's a soft aspect or a hard aspect, the gift is there in the end because the reward is there if the work is done, if you do rise to the occasion of Saturn. That's why I think Saturn is incredibly important in the chart.
Yes. Grant Lilly called it, I think it was Grant Lilly, the cosmic paycheck.
Yeah.
We get what we have earned under Saturn transits. And if we don't earn anything, it doesn't work as well as if we've been working hard.
Right, exactly.
And making some shifts.
Mm-hmm. And
Saturn rules maturity. It always gives us tests of the ongoing maturing process, which really never stops.
No, it doesn't. And I've got a son who's 27 now, coming into his Saturn return, and I see him going through that process right now, and that's important. It's a necessary step.
Is he one of your twins?
No, he's my younger son. Yeah, no, the twins went through that a while ago. They had it on their Ascendant back in I forget. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But and it's funny because at that time the twins, ironically, well maybe not, at least the first twin got married and had a child, and then about a year and a half later, the second twin got married and had a child and bought a house and all that stuff. So those are what I call the big Saturnian moments. Sort of it's time to grow up, get the job, get the house, get the baby, get the paycheck, and get going.
Yes, in a larger context, I think that Saturn return lasts the whole time Saturn is in the sign it was in when you were born.
Yes, yeah, that's how I see it too. I think it's about a 2.5-year stretch, I think, roughly.
Yeah, Saturn has long arms.
Because you feel it. You feel it.
Time. It has a longer reach.
Yeah, you feel it applying, or you feel that pressure gradually building over time as it gets closer and is applying to you. Then when it hits you and you feel it, and then as it begins to dissipate and wane and separate away, you sort of perhaps see the results of the hard work that's put in. And so that's when the reward comes, or at least the attaboy comes.
Yes, the recognition.
The recognition, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So. Other things about the Ascendant that you like the idea of talking about. There's some interesting pieces of it, and you mentioned the solar arc and the how about the solar, not the solar return, but the what's the word I want, go ahead, just keep going. Let's talk about the solar arc, and I'll come back with the word. I keep forgetting the word just escaped my mind, but that's okay.
Okay. Solar arcs are really a fascinating predictive technique, and I think personally that they all refer to the growth and development of the sun because it's the movement of the secondary progressed sun that creates them. So they're all paced with the sun. They're all timed with the sun.
And you like the solar arc?
Since we move...
You like the solar arc more so than the secondary progressions?
Well, no, but solar arcs always give you the opportunity to feed your sane side. Even if the sun isn't involved in a solar arc, a strong response to it will always strengthen your sun. And with a stronger, healthier sun, it's easier to get all the rest of your needs met.
Yeah.
And secondary progressions refers to the development of that individual part of your psyche, not necessarily of the sun at all. Sun sign astrology has been around for a long time because there's a lot of truth in it. And the sun is the pilot of that spaceship. If your pilot is sick or off duty or not paying attention or doesn't know where he is in the universe, no matter how well the rest of the crew is working, we may have some trouble. That spaceship may get into trouble. So solar arcs always have the potential of supporting your sun. The converse is true, too. A weak response to a solar arc may have a weakening effect on your sanity, on your healthy, normal ego. So when solar arcs involve the ascendant, the persona needs to adjust or adapt in order for you to keep on being optimally sane. Some adjustment in the persona needs to happen so that it better expresses or protects sun, or it better mediates between the sun and the outside world. Those are really the three functions of the ascendant: to express, to protect, to mediate. And I would also add to explore the environment.
So it's always within that sort of conversation. It's a dialogue kind of, of diplomatic contract or making a deal with yourself is what it comes down to.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm. To express, to protect, to, what's the third one you said?
Mediate.
Mediate. That's where I got the idea of the idea of the diplomacy. It does come down to that, though, and in that you have to, I think we find ourselves in positions. When you do this historical look back, you'll find yourself in positions at times when those aspects were triggering. You'll find that was a time of having to have a trial, perhaps, or of a victory of some sort in your life where you hit home runs, or you were faced with a huge obstacle.
We get some challenges with the solar arc, and the challenge is: am I going to respond well and affirm my individuality and my sovereignty over my own life and my own creative force, my own creative products, or am I going to keep my head down and keep my mouth shut and let other people take some of my sovereignty of my life over my own life away? That's what solar arcs are about. Quick example, I'm dating myself here, but when Bruce Springsteen's album Born in the USA came out, it had 7 singles that were in the top 10 from one album. I don't know if anyone has beat that record since. I don't think so. The title song was really about what Springsteen thought was the raw deal that the U.S. was giving to returning Vietnam veterans.
Right.
He didn't go, but he was of an age where he knew a lot of people who went. He was born in 1949. So Ronald Reagan, on the campaign trail, decided to appropriate this and said that the dream of America rests in the hearts of thousands of you. It rests in the words of a song by the man that so many young Americans admire, New Jersey's own Bruce Springsteen. So this is the President of the United States, and commenting on this publicly, I think, is a little bit of a stretch for most of us. And Springsteen, having everything but the kitchen sink in Libra, did this fairly diplomatically. 2 nights later on stage, he said, well, the president mentioned my name in a speech the other day. I'm wondering what album of mine he was listening to, because I don't think he's heard this one. And then launched into the song.
Yeah, interesting.
So he claimed sovereignty over his own material. He claimed it as his own. He didn't let somebody else appropriate it, particularly in an inaccurate way.
Misappropriate it,
He
yeah.
said, hey, this is my song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in order to do that, he had to stand up to the President of the U.S.
Well, he did it in a very diplomatic Libran way.
Yes.
Which was wise.
It was elliptical, but it was clear.
Yeah, it's good that he did that. And, it's sort of these conversations that we have with the planets and ourselves that ultimately bring us to the person I think that we're supposed to be, provided we pay heed to the road signs along the way. And this is the beauty of astrology, because it does provide those roadmaps and those road signs that are there.
Yes, it does. Astrology is like a roadmap.
It's the ultimate
and
roadmap.
Your chart is sort of the map you were given, but you have lots of choices about how you're going to follow that particular route and where you will stop and what side trips you'll take, where you might settle for a while. The chart is a given. How you deal with it is completely up to you. That's where your free will comes in.
Yeah, and free will is a very important piece. And free will can be colored by experiences brought about by aspects to the ascendant, because you're going to go live through your life through experience, as I did going to prep boarding school. You go through, so that experience put me into a position that I was not familiar with, and I had to cope with it. And that experience was what allowed me to grow and adapt to and respond to the transits that were happening to my ascendant at that time. Having those planets there at that time forced me to say, life is different than it used to be. You've got to change now. You got a roommate you don't know, and you're a long way from home, and you're young, and you don't know who you are. So this is a time to really test that. I'm sure people have other experiences that are similar to this, and if you go back to their charts, you could see these events stacking up. And they would make sense. I just thought of that because it was a moment in my time. So when I go back and look at those charts, they are, that's where the hardship comes in, and that's where the growth comes. And you do have to rise to the occasion. I think we have the opportunity to rise to the occasion. I think that sometimes the harder aspects, all difficult though they may be, if they are handled appropriately, they are great, great stepping stones to get you up that ladder. That's why the 90-degree angle is always referred to me by me as a stepping stone, because it's literally, you look at your staircase, it's got a 90-degree angle on it. It's just like climbing those steps up the step.
Sometimes it feels like a trial by fire.
Oh, of course.
But responding well to it will always leave you stronger than you were before.
Mm-hmm. You're being pushed in some way to respond to something. If you respond to it appropriately, then you can get through, and you sort of, like I said, that's where the reward comes in. You can sort of see, well, okay, that was a pain in the neck, but I got through it.
Yes, and squares especially, most aspects require a certain amount of outer work. Some are just inner. But a square takes on the energy of the cardinal modality, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. And squares require starting something, doing something different, adjusting. Each side of a square needs to give a little. The irresistible force and the immovable object both need to give a little.
Yeah. And they do. I think they do. This is how you when you understand that and you can adapt accordingly, you gain the greatest benefit of that. And in some ways, I always refer to the squares as gifts. In some ways, they're challenging to go through, but they are gifts.
Mm-hmm.
They get you where
definitely they're gifts.
Mm-hmm. They get you where you need to go at the time. They are
some of our greatest teachers.
Yes, they are. They certainly are. Difficult though they may be at times, we still have to go through them. And it's interesting. Oftentimes, in my personal experience, through working through clients, I've seen people with, what we would consider to be soft aspects of an outer planet to a significant sun, moon, ascendant aspect in a chart, and see the, even though it may have been a hardship at the time, having to go through that brought them to a much better place on the other side, something that they may not even have thought of earlier in their life, but they had to go through that sort of baptism of fire, for lack of a better word, before they could get there.
Yes. Yes, I think that's true.
And that's sort of fulfilling.
Pluto tends to do that.
Yeah, fulfilling the role of the individual. This trial you have to go through in order to really come out of it as who you're really supposed to be. It's sort of like the idea of it is written. This is your written sort of pathway, and this challenge comes to you in order to respond to that and take that, which, depending upon your philosophy of life, can be comforting, even if it's difficult, because you can say, well, this is supposed to happen, so therefore I'll just accept it as it is and go with the flow and accept it because it's supposed to happen, although unpleasant it may be. But you have to be circumspect and look back at that time and say, well, this is where I grew the most because of the challenges that were evident. And then when you come out the other end of it, you do know that all things must pass as they do, and you come out the other end of it and you say, wow, that was difficult, but I'm actually happy it happened to me.
Some transits, I think, particularly to the Ascendant, feel a little bit like an initiation experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you look at the commonalities in shamanistic cultures across the planet, if you go through an initiatory experience, you're put in an unfamiliar environment. You don't see very well what's happening. You don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know what will happen. You go through a couple of challenges, and the only way out is through.
Right.
And at the end of the initiatory experience, you have become an adult, or you've done whatever else the particular initiation was meant to do in your tribe. It's a good metaphor for an outer planet aspect. We often don't know who we're going to be at the end of the transit. We don't know what we will learn at the start of it.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's very valid. That makes sense. That's why it's such an important aspect of the chart. I mean, I think it can't be overlooked. I think that And of course, I think where the challenges comes is trying to achieve the accuracy of that. And that's you've mentioned that in the beginning. That's probably the hardest thing to because the moon and the sun, we know where they're going to be at the time that you're born, but with the ascendant, we don't always know because that's that victim to whoever was in the room at the time and who was accurate, who wasn't accurate with regard to how they captured that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you can, the closer you are to the accuracy of that ascendant, the more germane the information of the chart will be, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've rectified many charts. It's part of my astrology business. And some of them I've done for other astrologers who just think that the way transits seem to be timing in their lives, their ascendant might be a little different. And that's always fascinating. Frequently I find that somebody's birth time was something like 3 to 10 minutes off.
Interesting.
And this is among astrologers who are particularly sensitized to that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they could feel that something was just not right then. Given a major life event in their lives, maybe didn't pair up or match up properly with the role of Pluto or Saturn to the ascendant if they went through a challenging time.
The red herring is the progressed moon, the timing of the progressed moon changing houses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that consistently seems to lag behind what your computer printout is saying or to be ahead of what your computer printout is saying, then you may want to think about your birth time.
Yeah, it's worth looking into. I think that's true. Very good point. Mm-hmm. And will people learn that in the class that you're teaching? Is that one of the characteristics you're going to talk about?
Yes, I've been talking about when somebody comes in with 29 degrees or 0 degrees of the sign rising,
mm-hmm.
that I think it's part of the astrologer's job there to ask the client what I call tie-breaking questions.
Okay.
And to see which ascendant you feel this person has.
Mm-hmm.
You also need to ask tie-breaking questions about the descendant, what they find appealing in relationships. And you need to look at which planet that could rule the ascendant seems to be more sensitive to the events in that person's life.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
If they could have Virgo or Libra rising, do they respond more to transits to their Mercury or their Venus?
Right.
Or progressions involving Mercury or Venus?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's easy to tell.
Mm-hmm.
The line between Sagittarius and Capricorn is easy to tell apart when they're on the ascendant.
Right.
But it's always a good idea to go through those questions if you see somebody whose ascendant is in the last or first degree.
That's good tip. Good to know. We've been talking today with Jodie Forrest. She's an astrologer. Her website is jodieforrestastrology.com. It's JODIEFORREST, astrology.com. She's currently teaching a webinar on interpreting the ascendant in readings. You can join her course by going to her website and signing up there. And anything else that you need to know about what people would need to know about joining up, other than the fact that they can get tapes of the whole show, even if they do decide to show up late, correct?
Yes, definitely. It's suitable for everybody from beginners who have a basic knowledge of the signs, planets, houses, up through people who've been practicing a long time. And much of what I'm focusing on is ways to present the ascendant, stories you can tell, images you can use.
Yeah.
Something to connect it to the listener through image and story.
Yeah.
Which tend to be more powerful than textbook definitions.
Oh, much more so. When I do readings for people, I tend to use stories quite a bit. It's just a personal style of mine. I think it illustrates the character I'm trying to get across better than just saying something more mechanical in astrological talk. I try to relate it to some sort of an analogy or draw a metaphor that helps them derive the idea. And I think it's that nuance that helps flesh out, and that gives you the language, as you say, using those stories. It gives you you can use the language to help articulate your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
it puts more tools in the astrology toolbox.
More tools in the tool bag. More colors in the crayon box. Anyway, Jodie, thank you so much for coming on today. I knew the hour would go fast, but that's just the way it goes. Again, we've been speaking with Jodie Forrest. Her website is jodieforrestastrology.com. That's JODIEFORREST, astrology.com. And you can sign up for her webinar there, and I suppose you have all the usual stuff we all have, Facebook, all those things going on. And it's a great place to find out who you are and learn more about who you are as an individual. Like once you understand your ascendant, you'll have a lot of light bulbs go off in your head about who you really are. And it's a really, really important piece of the chart. So I encourage you to look into that. Thank you, Jodie, for coming on today. It's been great to talk to you. Hopefully we won't go 12 years before we talk again.
Oh, yes. Let's do this sooner.
Okay, sounds good. Very good. Thanks so much for coming on today.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.